Without people, this is the show. What we've made is a structure, a kind of structure to play within. When there are people inside the structure, it becomes a show. It's a piece for a group. Lots of people talk about theatre as a shared experience. We're interested in how people have different experiences of what they share. In this show, the Justice Syndicate, everyone is a juror. They review evidence on tablets and try and reach a majority decision. We're asking them to draw conclusions about whether the accused is guilty or not guilty, based on the information they receive. The show plays out differently, depending on how they fill in the gaps.
So, trying not to infer, and when other people infer, like, oh, she must have felt like this, and he must have been like that, it's kind of like, well, you don't know, and you can only use what you're given to make your point. And so it's quite, and then when that comes to clash, when you're like, oh, you're just assuming, you're not actually, there's not physical evidence to back your point up, and they disagree, it can get quite heated.
I'm really understanding and listening to see how people form opinions about people and how they judge people.
The conventional view on how we make decisions is that we will look at all the evidence and then weigh it up rationally to come to a decision. But what we know from neuroscience and psychology is that there is a lot more going on in the automatic, intuitive parts of our brain. And those parts of our brain make us jump to conclusions on very little evidence. Now, what that then means in terms of our rational, or how we think of our rational decision making, is that we start justifying that decision that our intuitive parts of our brain are offering to us. And so rather than rationally analyzing the evidence, we may be justifying our intuitions to convince ourselves that we're making the right decision.
The system running the game also uses the data it has about each person, how they voted in the taking the temperature votes, how long it took them to vote, to subtly differentiate each player's experience.
So the piece uses machine learning, in particular polynomial regression, to try and accurately predict how are jurors leaning throughout the piece. This may be trained on specifically how long they take to vote, whether or not they look at specific evidence, or how they even interact in group discussions. By using this data and analysing it in real time, we're able to accurately change and adapt key pieces of evidence to try and suit a specific narrative. And by doing this, we're able to actually predict how the outcome is likely to look.
However the gaps end up being filled will make the show very different. It'll be objectively different. Different conversations will take place to previous or future shows. It'll also be subjectively different. Juror 7 will have a really different experience to that of Juror 1, which throws up some questions about what a critical response looks like. How can you tell if the artwork is any good? Sure, you can review the structure. Does it break? Do I understand what I'm being asked to do? Do I find it repetitive in a way that causes my attention to drift? But those are questions about the structure, and the structure isn't the artwork. If the people and their actions are the artwork, then in a critical response, you'd kind of be reviewing yourself and the other people. But if you don't know the other people outside this context, how do you know what the artwork has invited and what is just them being how they are all the time? Even if we take a step away from what a critical response would be, how do you go about even documenting the experience that one person had? The control system that Joe has built does a version of this.
So what we are collecting throughout the play is people's responses, how long they look at evidence, whether they vote guilty or not guilty, whether they choose to exclude someone from the jury. What that type of evidence is going to allow us to look at is how people make decisions, how quickly they come to a conclusion about the culpability of the person, whether they switch their vote sometimes throughout the game, and what types of evidence that it is that makes them switch their vote.
We use this documentation, the anonymised data we've collected, to help us predict what will happen in future.
The accuracy of the piece improves based on the number of tests we do. So with machine learning, the more data you have, the more accurate it will likely be. Every time we run this piece, it collects a huge amount of data about every juror, and we collate that with the final verdict, whether or not Dr. Huxtable's found guilty or not guilty. And by doing this multiple times and running multiple pieces, we're able to improve the accuracy of our predictions throughout the piece.
So really, what this evidence is going to allow us is to test certain psychological theories about how people make decisions and how the group consensus affects how people act individually.
Everyone, like at one point, I quite enjoyed playing devil's advocate with it, because we were all talking about how the Simon character was guilty, and then it was like, well, what if he's not? And then when you play that devil's advocate role and everyone around you is saying guilty, guilty, you feel sick for not agreeing with them. And then when you don't agree with him, it's like, what's wrong with me? So you feel inclined to sort of give into the pack mentality and be like, actually, yeah, he's guilty. So it's quite interesting how other people's opinions can shape your own, regardless of whether you believe what they say or not.
I think just the responsibility of making that decision when you have a gut instinct, and the legal decision might be different to your gut instinct decision. And so, you know, you're sitting there all the time thinking, God, if this was real, how would I feel walking out of that courtroom? It felt very real. It felt like there was a lot at stake and we really had to get it right, even though you knew it was a game.
Knowing that you might, as a human, have like your morals and like a real human instinct to make an assumption and form an opinion about a situation, but what a jury has to do, like with concrete evidence, and make that decision, which is really difficult. That will stick with me.
The film is also imposing a coherence on what happened. It fills in the gaps to keep your attention. So there's layer upon layer of interpretation going on. The original idea has evolved through collaboration. The game is experienced by each player. The memory of the game is experienced by each player. The combined story of the memories of the game turned into this film by people who want you to think it looks interesting, want you to fill in the gaps from what we've shown you, to imagine something that you'd want to be part of. So maybe it's not a documentation anymore. It's more what we want to have happened.
I want people to have a conversation with a group of strangers about something really important, to perhaps disagree with each other, to perhaps encounter people outside of their echo chamber.
I want it to be fun. I also want people to feel like they can go to some more challenging places. I think art can do something which is put a frame around difficult subject matters, which means that within the game, people are okay to talk about things that in normal life they might want to avoid.
I want people to have an experience of finding out that when we're looking at the same evidence, we might still come to very different conclusions.
I'd want the jurors to have fun. At the end of the day, this piece has a lot of very important topics, but it's important to just go with it. That's shit. What's the point of that?
How do you want them to feel?
I don't know. I don't really. I'm in the corner, like freaking out about turning the page. I don't know. When playing this piece, I want the jurors to enjoy themselves. This is a piece that has very important topics, but ultimately it works best when the group is having fun and they are really involved in the content.
We play tested the game in development, and some of the people told us they experienced some of these things.
It was when two of the participants were asked to role play the internet chat. You know, you might watch that on a drama on television, but when you've got to read it out yourself, you know, it was a very powerful moment, yeah.
When we had the guilty or not guilty vote halfway through, and 12 people said guilty, myself included obviously, and then by the final decision we all, or at least the majority, had voted on not guilty. So it was quite cool to see how, it was quite weird to see how throughout the process everyone sort of changed their minds.
There's something about that difference of experience being the point. It's part of why we make audience-centric work, because it naturally invites different approaches, perspectives and experiences. It's naturally polyphonic. The people in this room need to reach a verdict, sure, but that doesn't mean setting aside everything that makes them different. They have to learn to coexist in that difference, to find a way to disagree civilly, like in life.
when people are saying, oh, that's enough evidence that he's guilty, it's kind of like, well, it's not enough evidence.
So yeah, difficult, but after a while you kind of had to yield. Yeah.
Felt like when we were disagreeing with a purpose. You know, it felt as though we were testing each other's ideas and our own ideas. You kind of were glad of the opportunity to hash it out a bit, so the disagreement felt positive.